Today we'll be speaking with Marie Chabot. She's a wonderful singer-songwriter who has suffered so much loss. She's both a widow, and both her mom and her dad have died, and she suffered anticipatory grief through the death of her mom. She shares her hope in her music, and before we interview her, I want to play for you one of her newest songs, The Other Side of Someday. So let's listen to that first, and then let's talk to Marie.
I'll never forget your tenderness and the way you made me smile, or looking into your sad brown eyes and holding your hand for a while. You made me stronger than I ever thought I'd be, and you gave up all your dreams to follow me. And I know someday I will hear you laugh again, and I know missing you will go away in time. And when I find the other side of someday, I know just fine. Loving you every day made my life complete, and laughing at the world was all that we could do. And since the day God called you home, I search and I pray, but I will never find another you. You made me stronger than I ever thought I'd be, and you gave up all your dreams to follow me. Someday I will hear you laugh again, and I know missing you will go away in time. And when I find the other side of someday, I know I will be just fine. And when I find the other side of someday, I know I will be just fine.
Welcome, Marie. Perhaps you could introduce yourself.
I am Marie Chabot. I'm a singer-songwriter. But I also work for a church as a director of faith formation. About 6 years after I married, my husband and I moved to Nashville, Tennessee, because, as I said, I'm a singer songwriter, and he really believed in my career and thought that I had something that I could pursue better in Nashville. And things were good. We moved there. I started getting gigs as a background singer, and things were moving right along. But a year after we had moved there, my husband, whose name was Glenn, actually, was killed in a car accident. So at that time, we were both 30 years old. It was so sudden and so devastating to me that that was my first experience of grief. My parents, of course, wanted me to come back home to Massachusetts. I felt like Glenn and I had started something that I needed to pursue. So I stayed there for a while. And dealing with that, well, I didn't deal with it very well. I became a workaholic. I worked a day job, I worked a night job, I worked as much as I could so that I wouldn't have to deal with the grief. Um, and I found a lot of support in my church group that was there at the time. So fast forward several years past that, I did eventually come back to Massachusetts with my children, and I took care of my two elderly parents. My father, who was the caregiver for my mother. My mother had Parkinson's disease with dementia, so he was 24/7 her caregiver. But he had a stroke, and so he passed away before she did. So then I took my mother into my house, and I lived her last days with her, and she died as well. And I didn't really have time to grieve my dad because I was taking care of my mother. So there was all this grief all at once: my father, my mother, and then as I started to feel my loss for them is when it hit me about my husband, that I had never really processed that grief. And because I'm a songwriter and because I'm a creative type person, I started to write about the experiences of my mother and my father and how their last days were. And then that's when the grief really hit me about my husband. And that's when I wrote the song for my husband. So I had all these songs, and I thought, well, maybe if this is the way that I dealt with my grief, then maybe these songs can help someone else deal with theirs. So I put together this album, which is probably going to be out in September. But it's all about the process, and the songs are different. The one for my mother is about her days with dementia and how that was for her. And when I would come into their room, she didn't know who I was. The song about my father is more about looking back at the happy times that we shared. So there's different stages of grief, and I think that they're cycled through on this album. And I'm just hoping that the album can touch someone else and help them get through their grief.
Well, I think you've obviously had a lot of different grief events, like you said, your husband, your mom, your dad, the anticipatory grief of that. There's just so many different pieces you've had there, and it sounds like you've tried to incorporate all of those different experiences into the album. Um, when you were doing it, can you talk a little bit about some of the maybe the difficulties that it may have been to go on an emotional level to be able to actually write songs that are meaningful and really at the same time be dealing with some of your own feelings as you were doing so?
Well, what really helped me was I went on some journeys with a songwriting group. We went to I've heard people like James Taylor say that if you're stuck on writing and you feel like you have something to say and you just can't get it out, to go someplace that's completely different, because in a different environment you see things differently. So my first attempt at that was I went to Italy with this group in Tuscany. My grandfather actually was born in Italy, so I felt an immediate connection when I got there. It felt like I had been there before, even though I hadn't. And so that's kind of what prompted me to start to write about my grandfather. That was my first song. I wrote a song about my grandparents. And then after that, I went to Scotland. And again, another setting, another song. In Scotland, I started to write the song about my mother. And part of that was because the person who was teaching that workshop, her name is Jonathan Brooke. She's a singer-songwriter as well. She had gone through a similar journey with her mother. And so in speaking together about our experiences, she prompted me to think of things that I had kind of pushed aside that I didn't want to deal with. And particularly my mother not knowing who I was. My mother, when I walked in the room, thought that I was her sister-in-law. And when you're dealing with someone with dementia, you can't really say, "Oh, no, 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 I'm Marie, I'm not Rita." You kind of go along with it. And so going on her journey with her, it was interesting for me to see where she was going to take me each day when I went to be with her. Um, so that was a whole different experience that I hadn't really thought in particular about. But as I started to write this song, those are the things that came out of the song.
Wow, it sounds like you really went to a lot of different places to kind of dig deep into doing that. If someone's listening to your music and they're hearing it, what is your hope for them from their perspective when they're listening to the music?
I'm hoping there's a connection. But when I tell people that my album is all about losing people, I don't want them to think that it's a sad album, because it's not that at all. I feel like it's a hopeful album. It's these people that I've lost, even though they're not in my world, they are still teaching me from beyond. When I have my memories of them, when I think about different situations in my life, sometimes I feel like they're there, like they're guiding me, and to me that's hopeful. That's not, it's not goodbye. It's that someday, somewhere in a different place, we're going to have an experience again, and it might not be for a long time, but they're still there. And so, in that way, I hope that people see my album as a hopeful thing and not a sad thing.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about, I know you had mentioned it earlier, a little bit about the inspiration from and the story behind the other side of Someday.
Well, it's interesting. I was in my car. I was listening to Sarah Bareilles, who's another singer-songwriter that I really admire, and she had this song about leaving a relationship, and she said in this quick little line in the song, "I'll get over you on the other side of someday." And I thought, wow, the other side of someday, what does that mean? And I started thinking, the other side of someday, the other side of my grief, the other side of my anger, the other side of my experience of losing someone. And so that became the song, "The Other Side of Someday." And it's a song that is about my husband, um, and just what he meant to me.
Well, that I think that's great, and I love your message that there is another side of Someday. That despite where someone may be in their grief journey, that's not where they're always going to be, and that there is something else to be found, and like you say, the hope that's there. So that's really, I think, an incredible message that I would hope everybody would take away from anything that they're doing in grief. So thank you very much for sharing that. Kind of think about, in order to write the songs, you had to kind of dig into your own self as a human being, and you talked a little bit about the process that you went there. But what was something, if you could say, that you kind of learned about your own grief journey? If you wanted to kind of share, you've obviously shared the hope and the thought, but is there anything you'd want someone to know who maybe has not had the time to do some of the introspection that you've done, that you would want to share with them for their grief?
Really was interesting to me is that, I was writing these songs. When I started to write, I thought, well, nobody's going to want to hear this. I'm just going to keep this for myself. This is going to help me get through. Um, and so I thought, as I started, that this is going to be a sad thing. But like I mentioned, it's not a sad album. It's a hopeful album. But the song that was the most difficult for me to write was the song that I wrote about my father, and it was because I had so many happy memories of my father that I hadn't allowed myself to think about, because I was so sad that he was gone. But as I started to think about, well, what are some of the things that I miss about my father that I loved, that made me smile? And one of the things was every time there was a thunderstorm. He and I loved a lot of the same things. We loved roller coasters. We loved thunderstorms. And I have other siblings, but I felt like those things were special to my relationship with my dad. And so anytime there was a thunderstorm, if we were at home or in the house or anywhere, the two of us would meet out on the porch. We had this patio that had a tin roof, and so the rain out there sounded amazing, and the thunder and the lightning. And he used to tell me that the angels were bowling, and that's what that thunderstorm was, and the lightning was when they hit a strike. So I started thinking about how that made me laugh and how it made me happy, and that's what the song's about. And I laugh when I sing it because that memory is so potent in my life, that happy memory. So I think the thing that I learned is, don't dwell on the sad stuff that they're gone. Dwell on some of the things that happened that you loved. Even though you miss them, they still bring a smile to your face. They're still valid memories that you should be thinking about.
I think that's beautiful. I am so looking forward to you joining us on the cruise in 2020. and you'll be with us, and you'll be performing. You said your album's going to be coming out in the fall, so I
Mhm.
assume that all of these songs will be something that you'll be able to play for us on the cruise. And
Yeah.
if someone is looking to find your album, obviously it's not available out yet. Where would they go to find it, or where could they go to find out more about you?
I have a website. It's www.mariechabot.org. Um, and that's Chabot is my last name is Marie Chabot. And all my information is there. My social media links, my links to my other albums. I have a couple of other albums out. But yeah, everything's right there.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I do look forward to seeing you on the cruise.
Thank you.